there. Good afternoon. I hope you all had a wonderful lunch and that you are ready for what I hope will be a really exciting afternoon. We call these the lightning lectures, though I just was informed that in our program it actually says lighting lectures. So we're going to pivot. We're going to start with LED, and we're going to move to incandescent, spot, maybe some strobe. But by the end, you should know a lot about lighting. No, I'm just kidding. These are the lightning lectures. Let me just give you a sense of why we're doing this and what it is that we're doing. I'm biased, I know, but I happen to believe that we have some of the finest faculty in theological education at Brite Divinity School. We are blessed on a daily basis. Our students are blessed. I am blessed to get to work with them, to hear from them, to learn from them, and I don't get to do it nearly enough. Sometimes I'll get to duck into a class and learn a little bit and recognize how much I have to learn. That's always a good thing for us these days. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if the folks who come to Ministry Week could hear from our professors? But the truth is, we have too many professors for everybody to give a lecture. And then we thought, well, you know what? You could hear from many of them if we limited their time. They're all known for their brevity, so it's not going to be an issue at all. We have given each of our professors the task of sticking to the theme. The theme for the week is incarnating love, and so we've asked them to offer a 5-minute or less lecture on the topic, Who is my neighbor? And because each of them comes from a different field, bringing their own expertise, they are each going to have a chance to tackle that question from their own point of view. So I just want to first say thank you to the professors who graciously said yes to this. I figure as president, I have like 3 ideas over the course of my tenure that I can put out there and really push hard on. I'm using one of those ideas for this just to see how it will work. And so I want to say thank you to the professors. You'll see a clock up here. Some of you will have a chance to see. It's countdown, and there's going to be a countdown at the beginning that will get them ready to go. It will start. I will warn them at 30 seconds, and then when the buzzer goes off, their thoughts will have been complete, and we will be done. Then they'll be seated, and when we get to the end, after all 7 of our professors who are participating today have a chance to finish, they'll come forward. And that's your chance to ask some questions. I will remind them that their answers ought not to be longer than the lecture itself. Seriously, though, this is a chance for us to just get a snippet of what's inside these great minds that we get to work with and think with each and every day, and that are already a blessing to our community. Whether they achieve the 5 minutes or not, it is a gift to have you even try. So thank you, thank you, thank you for coming. So our first professor who will be participating in the lightning, not lighting, lectures today is Dr. Ariel Feldman, who is our professor for Jewish studies. And Dr. Feldman will come up and get ready. I know he has a PowerPoint that is already set up here. So we'll come forward. We'll be ready. Not start until you're ready.
No. Maybe not.
Here we go. I don't know how to work it either.
Yeah, you've done it.
It doesn't start yet.
This is fun.
Okay, you'll hear the countdown begin. 3.
In the Gospel of Luke, the question, "Who is my neighbor?" prompts Jesus to tell his famous parable of the Good Samaritan. But what if the parable was slightly different? The storyline is very much the same. A robbed man on the side of the road, a priest ignores him A Levite ignores him, and now a Samaritan is supposed to show up. But what if instead of a Samaritan, a Roman soldier stops by, cares for his wounds, takes him to the local inn, pays for the stay? Wouldn't that be a better story for Jesus' audience? A non-Jew, a soldier, oppressive Roman Empire. Look, and Jesus certainly had that option. He did not choose it. Why? Why not a Roman? Well, what do they say about the Samaritans in the Sunday school? Please recall 3 things. Samaritans worship God on Mount Gerizim. Jews worship God in Jerusalem. Samaritans and Jews really hated each other. The end. This information is not entirely incorrect, but there is so much more. For example, it wasn't always like that. We think that the Jewish and Samaritan identities emerged as distinct ones maybe only 200 years prior. And even then it was not a clear-cut split like this one, but rather most likely something like this, a sort of messy coexistence for hundreds of years. In fact, there's so much that Jews and Samaritans shared. They believed in one and the same God, as you know, and they also believed firmly that the Torah is the guidance for their lives under God. Europeans were thrilled when in 17th century the Samaritan Torah arrived to Europe. Then they compared it to the Jewish Torah and they found differences, 7,000 of them. Some are minor, some are substantial, and until about 80 years ago we're still arguing who changed the text, the Jews, the Samaritans, until the Dead Sea Scrolls emerged from the caves in 1948 as a time capsule from the 1st century CE. And we had lots of copies of the Torah there, and some of those copies were very much like the Samaritan Torah. And those scrolls were not left behind by a Samaritan community, by a Jewish community. Clearly, Jews and Samaritans read from the same text, at least some of them. So back to my question, why not a Roman? Look in Jesus' response to a man asking, who is my neighbor, right? But just a minute ago, Jesus asked him to read from the Torah. In a way, Torah is also a character in the story. A wounded man is on the road. All the 3 priests, Levite, and the Samaritan are required by the same Torah to love their neighbor, but only one shows love. Not the presumably well-versed in the Torah priest or Levite, but a Samaritan, someone who misunderstands the basic of the Torah, where to worship God. So you see why a Gentile, a Roman, would not work for Jesus? It had to be someone who is obligated to live by the Torah, just as the other 3 persons in the parable. Well, it's very easy to miss the Torah as an actor in the story. She's almost invisible unless you read the story, this very Jewish story, with Jewish glasses, which means that you may have to take your Christian glasses off. This is what good neighbors do, after all. Well, we all wear glasses. Jesus' parable worked only because his audience viewed Samaritans through distorted glasses. They clearly needed a new prescription. Don't we all from time to time? Mm-hmm. If you're ready for the checkup, I know just the place. They have a great team. And the word on the street is that the glasses are free.
All right. Well done. "30 seconds.
Yeah.
Fantastic start. Thank you so much, Dr. Feldman. Next up, we have our professor of Hebrew Bible, that is Dr. Will Gafney. So I invite Dr. Will Gafney forward at this time. Stairs here and ramp here. Is this right?
I think so.
All right, we've got, ready?
Thank you, Ariel. Your frames framed my talk. Who is my neighbor is not a question I can answer from the primary discipline text of my discipline, the Hebrew Bible. But it gives me an analogy, for in the Hebrew Bible, your neighbor was your companion, one of your people. The ancient Israelites are not my people, so I would not be their neighbor, but learning from how they were to love their neighbor, I find the following in a text people no longer read because some of it at the end is not very neighborly. And by that I mean Leviticus chapter 19. You shall not steal, you shall not deal falsely, and you shall not lie to one another. This is within the community. You shall not defraud your neighbor. You shall not steal, and you shall not keep for yourself the wages of a laborer until morning. Shall not revile the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind. You shall not render an unjust judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. With justice you shall judge your neighbor. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The only place this verse occurs in the Hebrew Bible. If folk could love their kinfolk, the people who are like them, we might see some neighborliness. But my way of loving my neighbor does not come from this text, but it comes from a text that is scriptural to womanists. Mama, why are we brown, pink, and yellow, and our cousins are white, beige, and black? Well, you know the colored race is just like a flower garden, with every color flower represented. Mama, I'm walking to Canada, and I'm taking you and a bunch of other slaves with me. Wouldn't be the first time. Womanism embraces, nurtures, and works towards the flourishing of the community. And our communities look like our kinfolk, and my kinfolk are black and white and Korean and Mexican. So my neighbors are my folk, and their folk are my folk. And that's how I learn to love my neighbor.
They don't have to get progressively shorter. That's okay. This is great. Next up, we have Dr. Jeremy Williams, who is currently our assistant professor of New Testament, but yesterday was approved for tenure and will become, in June, our associate professor for New Testament. I would welcome Dr. Jeremy Williams up at this time.
Do I get the remainder of the time from my Bible colleagues?
All right, here we go.
Good afternoon. I'm taking a couple extra seconds. Good afternoon. I want to speak to you for a few moments about who is my neighbor, an American dilemma between care and carceralism. Who is my neighbor? An American dilemma between care and carceralism. As you all know, I felt almost like this topic when it came was a bit of an alley-oop as a New Testament scholar, but the way that Dr. Feldman has already exegeted Luke 10 has left me scrambling a little bit. But that dynamic analysis reminds us of how Jesus answers this exact question of who is my neighbor. As a man is going from Jerusalem to Jericho, he falls amongst these robbers. And as he is traveling, he falls amongst them, left for half dead. And as he's laying there, a priest, a Levite, walked by. And then this Samaritan, as Dr. Feldman has already noted, one who is through the lens of Judean and Roman propaganda viewed as negative in a way that it would seem that it was antithetical, that goodness and Samaritanness could go together in one person. But one of the questions for interpretation and hermeneutics is, where is the contemporary reader? And where would a U.S. reader be in this text, and many U.S. readers? Unfortunately, I have to let you know that they wouldn't fall in line with that Samaritan who cared for this potentially undocumented person, this potential person who is unhoused, seemingly left on the side of the road as half dead. And I know a lot of times in congregations we like to use the priest and the Levite as tropes to beat down where people normally are, going about their religious activities, crossing to the other side. But a contemporary American wouldn't even fall there in many ways, because at least this priest and Levite mind their own business and they keep on about themselves. But to find where many U.S. readers find themselves, I think we have to invent a character. We have to invent a character who sees this individual on the side of the road, and rather than assist or rather than even mind their own business, they instead call Jerusalem P.D., like in LAPD, for recognizing that this person might be unhoused and their presence could very well be bringing down their property values. Perhaps the character would call the equivalent of Judean ICE, because this seemingly undocumented individual is making their community unsafe. Perhaps they would have called their own local law enforcement, saying that this individual here should have known better than to be traveling the road between Jericho and Jerusalem. So their bad position is not something that just happened to them, but they chose it, and they are victims of their own choices. And so what abolitionists have helped me to think through is, when we think with these types of logics, we choose carceralism over care. And CARE there is an acronym that I borrow from For Everyone Collective and from Mariam Kaba, that it is about community, accountability, restoration, and equity. And so this story then, I'll ask us, are we going to align with that fictional character that I created, who is calling the cops to increase the carceral state, to take this vulnerable person and add them into their ranks? Or are we going to side with this Samaritan, one who operates in care and tells the innkeeper to care after this person as they seek to create a world, not one that's based on increasing carceralism in the prison industrial complex and the ways that it impacts all of our lives, increasing surveillance through ring cameras and otherwise. But instead, are we going to align with this Samaritan who chose care rather than carceralism, who chose reparations rather than retribution, who chose to build up rather than to tear down? And I believe that in this story, we get an opportunity to see what could it mean for us to be a good American, to be a good citizen, to be a good neighbor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Dr. Tim Lee, who is our associate professor of Christian history. Come forward at this time, Dr. Lee. Thank you so much.
All right, Dr. Williams and Dr. Gafney are hard acts to follow. So I'm going to piggyback on...
You're good. You're good. You're set. You're good.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Okay, piggyback on Ariel. In Luke chapter 10, verses 36 to 37, after telling the parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus asks his interlocutor, who is a neighbor to the victim in the parable, the priest, the Levite, or the Samaritan? And the interlocutor responds, the one who showed him mercy. Let's shift gears a bit and go back in history to the end of 1919, to a country in East Asia, to Korea. Before the peninsula was divided into North and South, when it was under the colonial rule of the Japanese Empire, which had annexed Korea in 1910 and had gone about systematically annihilating Korean culture, history, and language. By that time, Protestantism had been in the country for 35 years and was rapidly spreading. One key reason for the rapid spread was political. Many Koreans had embraced Protestantism not only as religion, but also as an ideological bulwark against Japanese ideology, especially state Shintoism. Japan's occupation in Korea from 1910 to 1919 is known as the military rule, in which fear, intimidation, and coercion were the main tools of control, with the military police, gendarmes, with their long swords enforcing the policies. Koreans obviously did not like that and sought ways to free themselves from Japanese domination. So when in January 1919, in the wake of the Allied victory in World War I, US President Woodrow Wilson urged equitable consideration for colonized populations, Koreans organized and carried out nationwide peaceful protests, basically marching through streets shouting, "Long live Korean independence," like top two pictures there. They thought, wishfully as it turned out, if they brought their plight to the attention of Wilson and the victors of the First World War, they might be helped to be free. Caught completely off guard, the Japanese government general deployed gendarmes and even soldiers to suppress protesters violently. In this uprising, Protestants played crucial roles. They provide key leadership, and their churches served as the basis of protests throughout the country. This anti-colonial and peaceful uprising posed a dilemma for the missionaries. What should they do? Initially, most of them were reluctant publicly to side with the Koreans because doing so would have risked offending the colonial government, whose approval they needed to do their work. On the other hand, if they ignore the Koreans' cause, they would lose trust with them and face difficulty working among them. In the end, a significant number of them shifted towards openly supporting the Koreans. This occurred mainly because they were outraged by the atrocities perpetrated against the Koreans. Thousands of them had been killed, many more injured and imprisoned. Korean Protestants bore the brunt of the casualties. In one instant, 23 of them were corralled into a small rural Methodist church and massacred. The church set on fire. The missionaries, as a result, went about providing succor to the Koreans. They protested the colonial policy. They hid fleeing protesters and attended to the wounded, some of them getting into trouble with authorities for doing so, like Eli Miller Mori in the picture. They also publicized the outrages in Europe and the United States, sending the photos of atrocities and testimonies of victims, using their private channels. As a result, Japan came under severe criticism from political leaders
30
in
seconds.
the United States. This caused Japan, always sensitive to the West's view of itself, revamped its colonial policy in Korea, resorting to less brutal tactics, at least until the 1930s, when it became outright fascistic, entering an alliance with Nazi Germany. The uprising did not end in Korean independence, but it did help to galvanize them into a national community. And if you could have asked a Korean at the end of 1919 whether those missionaries who had attended to the victims of the atrocities were neighborly, the answer would have been what?
No. Thank you. Well done. Well done. Well done. This is exciting. Okay. Next up, we have Dr. Russ Dalton, who is our professor for religious education. So Russ, we invite you forward at this time. We'll make sure you're situated and then count down the clock. Are you ready? 4.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood. It's beautiful to be a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? When I was growing up in my very small rural hometown, I never saw Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. We only got 2 television stations, and neither channel carried Mr. Rogers. But when I became an adult, the Reverend Fred Rogers, an ordained Presbyterian minister, became one of my heroes. Because Fred Rogers saw children. He listened to them. He took them seriously. He talked to them about their deepest fears, their greatest hopes, and the need to live justly. And he invited them to be his neighbor. As professor of religious education at Brite, a significant portion of my writing and teaching has focused on children. I serve on the editorial board of the Journal of Childhood and Religion and the steering committee of the Society of Biblical Literature's Children in the Biblical World Unit. And next spring, I will once again be teaching my course, Thinking Theologically about Children, Justice, and Practice. One of the growing fields of interest in biblical studies is a hermeneutical approach known as childist interpretation. It draws upon insights from feminist and womanist biblical studies to recover the presence, agency, and concerns of children who are often ignored and neglected in biblical studies and biblical texts. It then reflects on the insights that these readings give us for how we're to understand children in our world today. For example, if we avoid taking an adultist perspective on reading the Gospels, we understand that when Jesus said, "Let the children come to me, for the realm of God belongs to such as these," he was not merely using children as a prop or as a sentimental metaphor for adults and adult concerns. Rather, by taking a childist approach, we recognize that Jesus in the Gospels again and again and again affirms children as disciples and full participants in the realm of God movement. And perhaps we can conclude that, like Jesus, we should grant children agency and full participation in our communities of faith today by including them fully in our worship, our outreach work, our fellowship activities, and more. But taking these steps can be difficult for ministers because the adults in our congregation have been conditioned by our culture to see children's participation in our communities as unimportant. And we see the results. We occasionally hear an emotional appeal to the needs of children, but unlike Jesus or Fred Rogers, our wider society tends not to see children or recognize them as our neighbors or grant them agency. So, for example, in our country, and especially in Texas, our foster care system is broken. Our state has repeatedly been made aware that too many children in foster care are being abused, become homeless, and they're literally dying in our broken system. But our state leaders are not held to account and withhold the funding necessary or the attention necessary to fix the system. According to data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, firearms are now the leading cause of death for children and teens in the United States, more than illness, more than traffic accidents. But in our country, children are not granted agency to advocate for themselves. They can't vote, they don't make campaign donations, they don't sit on committees that make the policy decisions that affect their lives. And when children do exercise their
30 seconds.
constitutional right to raise their voices and march on matters of gun control or immigration, they're often dismissed, denounced, and even as we've seen this past week, their teachers' jobs are threatened. Who is my neighbor? Children are our neighbors, and we can make sure that they are seen and heard and granted agency and given justice. Won't you be their neighbors?
Well done. Well done. We've even had a costume change now. That is impressive. Thank you. Next up, we have one of our professors of theology, Dr. Namsoon Kang. Welcome, Dr. Kang.
One of my students is working on his MTS final. The theme is aesthetic. So I have to really pay attention to the aesthetic nature of what's going on. Not yet, please. Yeah. So what I do is to try to have this aesthetic dimension of our surroundings, not only with our brain, but also with our body. Okay, I have a question. Please don't set yet. To the present.
Yes.
Since you gave us a kind of assignment, I was working on this presentation and I realized I come up with 30 points. So tell me how many points that I can deal with.
As many as you can in 5 minutes.
So I will follow the guidance of Holy Spirit. Okay. Okay, you can sit up. As a teacher, I have two role models. One is Socrates, and the other one is, of course, Jesus. And one of the common denominator that they have is they are question lovers. So in my every class, I adopt a kind of so-called Socratic method. I'm not there as a teacher to give answers, but try to facilitate how to raise good questions. There are good questions and bad questions. And there is a book, very interesting book. The book title is Jesus is the Question. Subtitle is the 307 questions Jesus asked and the 3 he answered. So here I am, asking you more questions than answers. So who is my neighbor? You have to think about the nature of the question. I always say that there is no question in general. Every question has its own context, specific nature, and then you have to ask the question of the question. That's one of the ways that you become really A+ student. So, for example, this question itself presupposes that there are neighbors and non-neighbor, right? Otherwise, what's the point of asking this question? So neighbors and non-neighbors. And also this question can be the question of inclusion and exclusion. The moment that you decide, okay, these are my neighbors, automatically you just set the non-neighbors, so inclusion, exclusion. And also, so the question can be the boundary drawing or boundary crossing. So think about this nature of the question. Because you have to ask the question of the question. For example, who is asking this question? Why this question is asked? How does this question function? Or in what context this question is asked? So who is my neighbor? This question can be the question of affirmation. And this question can be the question of contestation. Though a question can be the question of ignorance. Or this question, who is my neighbor, the question of evocation to call to action. So just responding to the question like, okay, my neighbor is XYZ, is sometimes pointless. Like Augustine's question, he asked the question, the very famous question. He didn't ask, do I love my God? One of the bad questions, because it requires only yes and no. Right? He turned this bad question to the good question. What do I love when I love my God? You cannot just say yes or no. So good question is an invitation to the world of profound thinking. So here I am. You have to rechange the question as, okay, what do I do when I call the other as my neighbor? So the question is always already context specific. And the question can be the existential ontological question or the Christian question in context of Jesus' teaching, or this can be the really socio-political questions, because there are so many religious others, sexual others, gendered others, racial others, political others that we sort of exclude from the circle of neighbors that we think. Do you know who is the ideal neighbor? 10 seconds. Who is my ideal neighbor? Kierkegaard said, dead neighbor. Because the ideal neighbor is that one, because the dead neighbor is ultimate object of disinterested love, because they are absent and they demand nothing. They are the ideal neighbor. And then Adorno, who is a German thinker, he
30
said,
seconds.
Kierkegaard that neighbor as a social critique, because today, neighbor relations impossible. So the question that I want to ask you today is that when you call the other as neighbor, how you are going to mediate your neighbor question and also your daily life, what you are going to do? I said only 4 points.
That was so great. And next up we have Dr. Natalya Cherry, who is a professor of theology and Methodist studies at Brite Divinity School. Would it be helpful to have this?
Yeah, actually, that'd be great.
I'm going to trade. She's going to have the other one.
Is that okay? You always have to respect the AV people. Is that good? Is that good? Yes, thank you. Those of you who know me are wondering how this is going to happen. Yes, the answer is with all of your help. So my big idea for who is my neighbor is the big idea my whole work is centered around, which is a nutshell summary of what makes Christian belief distinct and how it has been lost in translation that goes so long a way to explain why white Christian nationalism is the Christianity of the day that clearly doesn't know what a neighbor is. So, if you will agree to audience participation, I'm going to give you 3 steps that will give us 2 insights into who is our neighbor. Are you ready? Excellent. So, I'm going all the way back to the turn of the 5th century to what many of you may think of as a dusty saint, Dusty Augustine, or Augustine, if you've said it that way. I like to think of him more like lusty Augustine, full of life and movement, because I don't primarily think of the tomes like the Confessions or the City of God or those things you had to read if you attended seminary or divinity school and then put on a shelf somewhere. I like to think of his sermons for actual everyday people. And in those sermons, he identifies something that people were already starting to forget after just a few hundred years of practicing Christianity. He said there are actually 3 different kinds of believing that take place in the scriptures that Jesus talks about. He says there's the first kind, believing in God, meaning believing that God exists, what Dr. Kang just mentioned as a yes-no question. So I'm going to ask you to physically participate. all it produces is a propositional, bobble-headed nod of assent. Yes, I think there is a God. Yes, I think, please nod with me, will you? Be your best bobblehead. Yes, Jesus is his son. Okay, great. So that's the first kind of belief. The second kind, also yes, no. I believe God. I believe Christ. Yes, what he says comes true. He says, demons get out, the demons go out. He says, you are healed of your infirmity. The person gets up and walks away. So we've gone from bobble-headed nod to assent to yes, it's good. Got it? So thumbs up, right. Augustine says, but when we look closely at what Jesus is talking about, when he says, I am the bread of life, when he says, believe into God, believe also into me. That's right, he's saying believe into God. But we've lost that in translation. He says, what does this mean? It means by believing to love, by believing to cherish or esteem highly, by believing to go into him, and because he's talking about Christ, him, and be incorporated in his members. And we could, in a separate lightning lecture, talk about the body pun that's in there, but that's not important right now. Focus, people, focus. I've only got less than 2 minutes. I'm going to ask you if you're able and interested and willing to stand where you are now. Because believing into Christ is weirdly pairing a thought verb with an action. Like maybe faith is about faith working through love, as Augustine says. So I'm going to ask you to put your leg up against the closest chair leg to you, because what he's talking about is we are, by the Holy Spirit, that's right, we get the whole Trinity in here in under 5 minutes, we are glued to Christ and move in the direction that the parent's will has always led Christ. Well, now, your leg is glued to a leg, but it's a stable leg. I guess that doesn't really work very well, although we can think about the fact that Jesus went and sat in places with people no one wanted him to sit with, which is the first of the two insights. My neighbor is the person to whom I am least likely to go and sit and be in relationship. So that's one insight. It's the other. It's the person I'm going to submit to be more vile, to just throw in a little Wesley there, by showing up with them and being with them in relationship. And now it's not just a yes, no. Now it's a relationship. There's one more insight we get from this. This is me. So if we're stuck by Jesus, using the Holy Spirit to the limbs of Christ to go wherever they always go, that means we're also stuck to Jesus with each other, stuck with each other. Whether we worship the same, love the same, look the same, act the same all the time, doesn't matter. We're stuck with each other. So please turn, and if you're okay with this, consent matters, put a hand on the shoulder of the person next to you, decide a direction, and start dancing with me. 1, 2, 3, love. 1, 2, 3, love. 1, 2, 3, love. 1.
That was fantastic. It was so much fun. And now if you'll check under your seats, you get to do the next lightning lecture. Just kidding. All right. I know it says lighting lectures. It wasn't lighting, but it was Brite. We are so grateful. I hope you can get a sense of the creativity, the care, the thoughtfulness, the depth, the intellect, and the fun of our professors, the joy that it gives, and it gave me so much joy to watch, and that was only some of our professors, so thank you. I'm going to ask our professors who gave a lightning lecture to come and maybe stand up in front here. We have a microphone up here. If you have a question that you'd like to raise, if you want to go a little bit deeper into what one of them shared, please, I invite you to come forward to this microphone. I also have this microphone, but they're going to be passing it down, so I'm not sure who would like to start here. Do we have any questions that raised for you? Yes, good. You all have an MDiv. Congratulations. Are there any questions to come? And it's okay if you don't, but okay, we have one here.
I'm a retired chaplain, but I spend a lot of time preaching for and to people with mental handicaps and developmental disabilities. But even after all that, many of the children's sermons I've heard have just not exactly been incarnating love. Do you have any suggestions or resource even that you might pass on? Yeah, I'm talking to
Dr. Dalton.
Yes, I didn't even get the name. Shelton?
Dr. Dalton.
Dalton? Okay, I was going to say,
Yeah.
Rogers, yes.
Yeah.
I can't
Or
even
Mr.
remember
Rogers.
that. I've been
Yes.
retired that long. Yes, just that question.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you there, and I could talk to you about there's a number of resources for ministry with children, and again, intergenerational ones. One of the biggest ones, though, I would say, is if you are a minister and if you are in charge of then a worship service, don't abdicate your responsibility as the resident theologian to just give over the children's sermon to whoever. Often I think it's really good for pastors to develop that relationship, but also to do training for all lay leaders, including who's going to give a children's sermon. And I always recommend that the children's sermon go along with the sermon that's being preached. And then you know it's theological. I'll tell you, at one point in my church, I had a great relationship. This was after I was a professor, but great relationship with the pastors. I sat through several of these because I've given workshops on children's sermons, but several in our congregation of these children's sermons that the theology was just way off. And sometimes it would be longer than the sermon itself, right? And so I talked to them, why'd you do that? And they said, well, we like to share things. We like to give things to different people. And I said, yeah, I want to talk to you about that. I've been here for years. You've never asked me to give a solo for the offertory. Oh, we didn't even know that you sang or that you had any background. So I don't. But if we're just giving out these parts of the service willy-nilly, especially to impressionable young children, then we've got to think twice.
Thank you.
Then can you take that from the children's sermon to speaking to our 3rd through 12th graders at camps and retreats and involving them as well in the church service?
Right. Well, one of the great things about camps and retreats and these different creative services is that I think it's often more allowable to include children in the leading of the worship, in the leading of, we could call it echo pantomimes, but liturgical movements of saying and training them, teaching them to do scripture reading, or even to offer the benediction or a call to worship, depending upon your theological perspective of your community of faith. And once you do that for these special services, like with camps or Children's Sunday or Youth Sunday, then it opens it up to the congregation and say, hey, why not in the middle of the year? Why not at different times do we have people to do that? Right. So I think you're right on.
Thank you.
Hello, colleagues. How are y'all doing? This is a question, I'm thinking of Dr. Williams, Dr. Gafney, Dr. Lee, but anybody can answer this question. How does care, kinship, and coloniality help or harm living into love?
Not all at once.
I'll take the first stab. Thank you for that question. One of the things that we can see with even the recent Super Bowl are the ways that colonialism teaches us how we should treat each other. One of the things about the parable that I wanted to highlight that Dr. Feldman mentioned as well is the Roman environment that these texts that we get that compose the anthology of the New Testament are in a colonial moment when the empire is telling people who to love and who not to love, how to be in relationship and how to not be in relationship. And so part of the work of being a good neighbor, which I learned a lot from thinking with abolitionist thinkers, particularly prison industrial complex abolitionist thinkers, is that we have to move away from using colonizing models of relationship that are based on canceling each other and punishing each other, but instead choosing to repair these relationships and see that our role and our work with each other is not retribution, but restoration. That our work is not to create colonialism, but instead to build communities. That our work is not to curate conflict, but instead to cultivate community. And so, to me, care, the community, the accountability, the restoration, and equity is a counter to colonial logics.
So I'll take kinship. Kinship for me is about connections, and those connections that may be tightest in what we call a family of origin are not limited to that. It's a particularly white American construct that a family is to child producing or nurturing people of, various sorts and conditions, and, 1.5 kids, a dog named Spot, and a white picket fence, right? But that's not a family to most of the rest of the world. So when you have this notion that the family and your family is the thing that distinguishes you and the thing that you have to protect and determines who you are in an individuality mode, then it's not generative of care or love or deep connection. But when your kin community is the place that nourishes you and sends you forth and the place you return to heal those wounds, and you negotiate a multi-generational and widely lateral community, then forming deep relationships with others is an extension of that rather than the narrow, they're not in our family, they're not like us. And so, we get these cul-de-sacs where nobody knows each other, or apartments where nobody knows each other. And I want to say one more thing, that when the word family is used in the biblical text, in the Hebrew biblical text, first, the smallest unit of organized social living is a household. It can be a mother's household or a father's household, but that is child-producing people, the children, and one set of grandparents, along with other extended members, maybe a widowed aunt. So the smallest unit is much like your Thanksgiving table. And then the next larger group, which is where the word family is also used. I always say that's your grandmother's funeral because it's all the Thanksgiving tables among a certain set of siblings. So that's what a family is in the Hebrew Bible. And so when we get these horrible exegeses about what a family is supposed to be, which is really some heteronorming, people don't even know what the words mean. Okay, that's my pet peeve. But kinship means being able to form these deep relationships that are across generations and come out of the family, connecting the family with another family so that when there's a union, you've got all of the people at your grandmother's funeral now joining to all the people at their grandfather's family, and that's what the new family then looks like.
I echo a lot of what Dr. Gafney has said, and some of what Dr. Williams said. In my classes, I talk about code switching. And by that I mean each of us come from a particular cultural setting, and then we are in this larger setting where people, each of them come from their own particular setting, and there are some commonalities that we all share, but they are rather thin, not thick enough for us to really come into deeply committed relationships. So when we are together in class, that's one context in which we can build into that thicker relationship. And so I talk about that because a lot of our students come from a particular confessional background, and they've never really been exposed to discourses in which they need to be able to speak with people from different contexts in a way that is civil and meaningful to both parties. And so this way of thinking kind of goes against the grain of some of the leading fashion of thinking, like I believe, you code switch to sort of a kind of general mainstream discourse context. What is that? Isn't that already kind of, informed by a particular power structure context? Nothing's free from authority anyway, right? So what's the point? And then and I also believe that we as a group of people, we call ourselves people who are in this ship called the United States, whether you're legal or not, we're all in it together, living together. So there has to be a story, common story that we somehow, each of us can somehow stick to. And this is a narrative, and this is, this sort of thinking has come under attack as being, meta-narratives that's oppressive. And so I think, oppressive or not, human beings need stories, and human communities, for them to work effectively, need stories, and human beings need public square. The thing is how we do that right, how we make our public squares in such a way that each of us can participate meaningfully and feel like we own part of it anyway. And the story, it is not simply Puritans founding this new nation anymore. But Puritans are not out of it. They're still there. How we, everyone else, Native Americans, African Americans, Asians, Hispanic, how we all go in there and create a new narrative. History, right? Theology. So all of that is part of the work of care, I think. Right.
I think since you mentioned this term, colonial, decolonial, one of the colonizing acts that we, participate in the name of care and love is you homogenize the others, and also you extend yourself to the others. So the neighbor of sameness. So in the name of care and love, if you look at the history of human civilization, in the name of care and love, there's such a colonizing act has been done. So what we have to do is that on all the terminology that we are using here, we have to really investigate, interrogate each term and de-romanticize. The meaning of a romanticization is that, when you romanticize care, love, what happens is that you do not want to see the dark side, the complex side of what it means when you say care and love. So you just want to see the bright side, which is really dangerous. So what we have to do is that the first colonizing act is to just homogenize others in the name of all the race, sexuality, or whatever that you come up with. And second is that you you have to see the heterogeneity and singularity of each person that you care. So what does it mean to care someone? Or what does it mean to love neighbor? It requires such a complex approach to what's going on in the world. So you read not only the Bible, but also you have to read the newspaper, you have to read the event. That's what we do at Brite.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes. Are there any other questions that you might have? Wonderful. Well, I want to say again a thank you to our professors. Thank you. They are what makes Brite so bright. We are so grateful for you. Please have a seat. Thank you. I wonder if Dr. Acosta has anything that she'd like to share before this next break prior to our workshops. So for those who might not be able to hear, there are vendors upstairs, kind of where you got your lunches. I hope you'll take a moment. This next bit is designed for you to be able to go up and speak with the vendors. There's also artists and the artwork that is in the gallery for you to come take a look at. We are so grateful to the artists for having shared their work with us. And yes? Sure, and we're going to get a group photo with the professors up here, an USSI. Yes, all right. Thank you so much. Blessings. And again, thank you to our professors.